Hey everyone, on today's stimulus update, Edin and I are talking all about Steve Mnuchin and Jerome Powell effectively coming out and telling Congress on Tuesday, we will back you, just do your thing with a second stimulus package. So we talk all things second stimulus and about these new plastic debit cards that are coming out that may be the perfect setup for round two. Check it out. Hey everyone, welcome back to another stimulus update. I'm Logan.
I'm Edin.
And Edin, we had Steve Mnuchin and Jerome Powell, J. Powell, went in front of Congress on Tuesday and effectively doubled down on their stance as far as helping out the people. So, Edin, break down a little bit about what message they sent to Congress on Tuesday.
Right, so just for background again, we got JP, Jerome Powell. He is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and we got Mnuchin, who's the Treasury Secretary. And so those two guys are essentially responsible for all things money in the United States. And with the CARES Act, Congress wants to get reports. What are we doing? How effective is it? Where's the money going? What impact is it having? So on Tuesday, those two guys had to testify. And essentially their stance was, look, everything we've done so far is working. We're doing a great job. Pat on the back. We're going to keep going with whatever we can. And the key was Mnuchin at the Treasury Department, his job is to kind of implement these programs. So the Treasury Department oversees the IRS, and they've been responsible for managing both the economic impact payments as well as the PPP loan programs for businesses. So that's why Mnuchin is so important in this. And then Jerome Powell, he's been in the news more and more because I think he had a big interview on 60 Minutes. And the question was, okay, the Federal Reserve, what are they doing to help out with all of this? And so this was a follow-up to that. And the story has been consistent. One of the few consistent stories that we're getting at Washington is that the Federal Reserve under JP is willing to do whatever is necessary, meaning they'll print as much money as they need to support the programs that the Treasury Department is doing.
Meaning Jerome Powell is stepping up saying, Congress, do your thing, issue out however much money as you want, because effectively we're here to keep people alive and keep people around instead of trying to save some money in the short term.
Correct. So again, stepping back, the Federal Reserve is very apolitical, or at least they're supposed to be. They're the economists that run the country from a monetary perspective, and so they're supposed to be looking out for economic policy irrelevant of which side of the aisle you are on politically. And so when you have somebody like JP come out and say, stop bickering about, do we have the money, do we not? We do. We're here. We're going to make it happen from our end. But you guys have to, put through a bill. Everybody's got to be on board. The president's got to sign. And then let me and Mnuchin figure out the mechanics behind the scenes on how many zeros we're going to be working with.
Exactly. And one of the things that they're actually doing now is we still have, we're talking about the second round stimulus coming in. We have this massive HEROES Act, potentially that they're discussing, which, by the way, Republicans have pretty much come out and said nothing's going to happen until June. They're going to take their Memorial Day recess and then come back and actually start to really discuss it and pick the thing apart. But by the time that they actually really get serious about anything, it's going to be early June. So we got some time on that, but what they're doing in the meantime is we still have about 10 million people that have not received their first round of stimulus checks. And these are generally people that are lower income. They don't have bank accounts, so they can't do direct deposit, and they don't do taxes. So there's 4 million of them, of the last 10 remaining, that will actually be getting a debit card with their stimulus check or stimulus money preloaded on it. And Edin, to me, this is almost like it's part where they're sending this money out in a different manner. But the other side of it is, if there is a massive round two of everything, this may be a way moving forward, because we talked about it before, but this way, if instead of having to manually keep printing out check after check, they can just keep loading this card up over and over and over if need be.
And I think that's what they're going after. There's a couple different issues. The first one is obviously speed. How quickly can we do this? And again, foresight, is there round two? How quickly can we reload in round two? And so I think the debit cards and a lot of other government programs, such as food stamps and WIC, have moved over the last number of years from traditional checks and vouchers to debit cards because they're easier to administer.
Right.
And the second...
Exactly. So, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just saying, so it really is like, it seems like they're trying something new with this, and just, you know, I know we talked about before, you know, they were talking about doing Venmo and Cash App and stuff like that. So the preloaded debit cards, that they can just kind of recharge if there is some sort of monthly second stimulus package that pulls through. That would be huge. And, you know, I know what is kind of happening right now with the Republicans is that they're effectively saying, look, because this whole June thing, we want to see what is happening with all of these reopenings. Before we pass anything big, we want to really see the numbers, because at this point, tons of states are either opening way faster or at least starting to dip their toe into the reopening pool. But the Republicans are kind of in a wait and see mode, which is, you know, you understand the pros and the cons of it, but that's kind of where we're at with everything. So it really is, you know, this June thing is a real deal for them.
Yeah, and I think also, I'm trying to figure out, are they subcontracting these cards out to somebody so that they're not having to take all the burden of printing the checks and getting them stuffed in envelopes, sent out? Is it easier to just do it and say, okay, well, whoever, you're going to print these, we'll give you the addresses and send them out. So I don't know what the thought process is. The idea of, you know, this is going to people who don't have bank accounts. My biggest question and concern is those people typically also move the most. So if they're not filing tax returns, I guarantee you they're not sending their newest and latest address to the government. So the question is, how are they still going to get these cards? And then once they get the cards, then yes, it's easy to administer. So I don't know if there's going to be sort of pickup centers somewhere where you can go and say, well, here's my name and my social security number, this is my card, and claim it. Or is there going to be some sort of different mechanism? I don't know. But yeah, I think it's much more about what's next and what are these numbers going to look like. Are we going to get better or worse numbers? I think the governor from New York, Cuomo, he came out and said that their numbers have somewhat stabilized and that they're kind of at the same numbers that they were at the beginning of all of this. So meaning they kind of did a bell curve and are towards the back end, which is very promising for the rest of us and the rest of the country in terms of we're getting good positive results. It looks like we're going to be reopening. That also does go to your point. The Republicans are waiting. So if they're hearing stuff like this, they're not going to have an incentive to go ahead and pass stimulus package number 2.
Right. So it almost seems like every move that the government makes has 4 or 5 dominoes after it that it's also going to be knocking down. It's the whole idea of the unemployment, the $600 per week that it's running out. Well, if you extend that, then that gives less incentive for those to get back to work that make less than they do at work than on unemployment. So a lot of implications on this, but some good news is that the IRS is actually, they just hired 3.5 million people to work a hotline. So if you have any questions about your stimulus check, where is it, what's going on with it, you can actually call somebody up and talk with them and figure out what is really going on, because, man, the unknown aspect of all this stuff has got to be killing a lot of people out there, just, you know, morally and stuff. So good move by the IRS to step up and work that thing out.
Well, it's just, to me, it's interesting because you say 3.5 million employees and there's 10 million who haven't gotten it. Am I getting the numbers right? So, you know, kudos to them for getting people on the phones. Question is it a little too late? But I think ultimately it is going to help, especially as these debit cards roll out, in terms of okay, where do you want your debit card sent to? Maybe that's the answer here, where they're going to ask these people to actually call in, say, hey, I'm still waiting on my EIP. How do I get it? And that's how they get the latest and greatest address. But I think it's also, again, a second derivative thing. This isn't the end of it. Even once everybody gets the economic impact payments, people are still going to have a million questions. I still get calls, people asking, will my stimulus get taxed? And I think those are the small things that these extra 3.5 million employees are going to come and be critical for in terms of answering.
Plus, second round of stimulus goes through. Guess who's already in place for everything? 3.5 million people. So we're all pretty hooked up. So Edin, let's end this thing by talking about a question that we got, or that you got, that was all about, if you're a small business, if you've already gotten your EIDL grant up to $10,000, plus you got your PPP loan, to get this thing forgiven, you got to pay 75% towards payroll. Well, does that 75% include the EIDL or not? So Edin, can you shed some light onto this question?
Absolutely. So this is where it gets a little bit more technical. At the same time, it's somewhat straightforward, because if you actually go back and read the instructions and basically the rules of the EIDL grant, the EIDL grant was meant to be used for essentially the exact same purposes as the PPP money. It was meant for payroll, rent, utilities. The EIDL loan lets you use it for some other things too, but the grant was meant for payroll, utilities, general overhead. So now when we're refinancing the grant into the PPP loan, we're essentially looking at the exact same number that will be used to calculate that 75%. Are you following so far?
Kind of. Break it down for me.
Sure. So let's say I'm going to use the question in one of my comments. It was, if I got a PPP loan for $80,000 and I had previously gotten a $10,000 grant, do I now calculate 75% of the 80,000, or is it 75% of the 80 less the $10,000 grant, which would be 75% of 70? The quick answer is it's the 75% of the 80,000, because you're supposed to use that original 10 from the grant for the exact same purposes. So if you blew that 10 on rent, now you have 70,000 less. So now you need to use 60 out of the 70 for payroll purposes. But that 75 is going to be on your PPP loan amount.
So effectively, whatever you got for your actual PPP loan, even if you got a big EIDL grant up front, that's what you got to pay the 75% on.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, very cool. So Edin, to wrap all this stuff up, let's just kind of recap everything one more time. So we had Jerome Powell, Steve Mnuchin doubled down against Congress, saying, look, we got you covered. You guys do the spending, save lives. We will make sure that the money happens. And Steve Mnuchin, on top of that, because he helps with all the IRS, another 3.5 million workers coming in to help answer whatever questions you got about these stimulus checks. Speaking of stimulus checks, they also are setting up 4 million prepaid debit cards that can potentially just get added more money to, can get recharged. So if there is a second round, which the Republicans have already said, we're not going to talk about that until after everything, slowly starts to open up and after Memorial Day break, then it's going to be much easier. Plus, we already have the infrastructure for all the questions that will be coming out with that. And then last but not least is, if you are a small business, just understand that the 75% of the money that you got for your PPP that is going towards payroll is based on your total PPP, not your PPP loan minus your EIDL. Edin, did I blow any of that?
Perfect summary.
Beautiful. Everyone, thank you very much. And as always, if you want to make sure that you stay up to date with everything that's going on in layman's terms, hit subscribe and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.